Two more lines we need to set. These make sure that we can get the ID for newly inserted rows, so that if a user's in the grid, they add a row, it's saved, then they want to edit that saved row, it makes sure the unique identity has been retrieved, so they're able to successfully perform the update. Otherwise you get a confliction violation message. So now we've set up the data adapter, the form load event will call the Gridex rotation types. You may know this already, but to ever trace where the code goes, you can right click on a call like that and choose go to definition, and it will take you to the source procedure. So before we go into the details, all procedures should be wrapped in a try catch block. Some people might disagree with that, but this is the method that I use, and I found it to be reliable, because in the catch I put this error handler, and again I'd like you to use this in all your code. It calls a custom error handler that I've written, which will write a log of the error to the error log, and it captures this extra information. Me name will pick up the form name. If you're in a class, you'll have to change this and put your class name in here. Okay, but in form names it's easy. So you can cut and paste this to the next procedure, and you only have to change this third property, which is the name of the procedure. So it means in the error handler, when an error fires, we know who the user is and what the routine is that caused the error. So this is standard. The other bit that we should use, especially for calls to the database, anything else that might take a appreciable amount of time, i.e. more than a split second, we should put in a wait cursor within the try block. This is important because if an error is thrown, we can then hit the finally, and the finally should set the cursor back to default. So the user should never be left with an hourglass cursor hanging for no reason. So let's see us filling the data table and the grid then. Because we can reuse this function within the routine, we may want to refresh the data. We should always clear the data table, even though the first time round it will be empty anyway. Then we use the data adapter and we use the fill method, and we fill the data table. Again, this will be the same for all grids. Then we set the data source to that data table we've just filled. If you did a watch on this at runtime, you would see this data table now has rows of data in it. We now check the flag. If the layout has not been set already, then we want to go ahead and lay the grid out. Remember I said we don't do this at design time, we do it at runtime. Well, this is where we're doing it. So retrieving the structure gets the rows and columns for this, and then we set the flag to know that we've set the layout. Then this code is where we actually lay out each column. Now you can explicitly refer to each column by using this and the brackets and the column, but I want to use this method because we're going to be putting in some automatic translation code later, and this will be a very convenient place to put it. So you loop through each of the tables in there, and then based on the column name we'll always set the ID to invisible, and there are some system columns which are not important and the user can't edit, but we still want to see them, so we set this property here again. You should reuse this all through these two sections, they'll be the same throughout. If we look at what happens as a result of that by running all this, we go to our settings and our code tables, and this is what that all looks like running. Now you'll see we've got some problems here. The rotation type is a bit narrow to see the caption. The rotation code similarly, so we could make those wider. And the user can do that themselves at runtime, and this is the reason we set the flag. If we were to refresh this table now, the layout would go back to the original one. But you'll see these columns can't be edited, but these can. Now we can choose to save changes anytime we like. Again, with experience I found this works best if we save changes as the user makes them. So to do that, we pick up the Gridex event record added. We can pick up the event handler. I put in my standard try catch block, notice with the specific name. So this snippet you can reuse again and again in your routines, you just need to change this routine. Then to save changes, very easy, we use the data adapter, rotation type, and then we use the update, and then again we put the data table in rotation type there, and that will update the table. Now because the table's changed on an update, we also want to save changes if the user's edited a record or deleted it. We don't have to keep writing new functions. You may or may not know this, but you can add additional event handlers to the same one if they all have the same event signature. That's this bit. So we can simply put a comma, look for Gridex rotation type, and we can choose some other events, and we want to add in the record deleted and the record updated events. We can wrap this round as well so we can read that more easily. So now we have a basic form that's going to enable us to add new records if we want. Okay, that's interesting. So we've got an error there. We can't insert null into column record created, and we can't edit that, so we've got a seemingly sticky situation. So again, this is going to bring me to something I'd like us to do as standard on all of these, and we can go back in here. We can pause this and resume. For all columns, so we'll put this outside there, if c.data type code equals a string, then c.default value is an empty string. Within the table we do have default values set on these columns, but it's a quirk of the grid that it passes null back if the user hasn't typed something in the cell, even if they just want an empty string to go back. So that will get round that. We'll exit out of this. We should also be putting code when the user exits like that to make sure there aren't any problems. But for now, let's try that again. So pause that and resumed. The problem we've got is I have certain system columns that normally get filled by triggers, which you then write into the audit table. But at the moment I haven't done that for this system until the table designs are stable. So for the moment we need to put in default values, which you can see here in this section, if the data type is string, or if it's a date time or record rev node when we're in this section, which are all these system fields. If we wanted to make another column wider, we could put in a specific statement for that column here, put the column name in, and we could set the column width. By default it's 100. So this is how we control the layout. And if you look in here at the properties coming under C, there's a lot of different options in formatting and controlling this. So one of the best ways to get to know what this can do is to look through these options and see what choices you've got there. But this is a very, very simple one that I've done, and basically this is done. Now for a slightly more complicated one, I'll just show you this without going into the code because you can look at it yourself. We look at users. This is a more complicated grid, it's a much bigger grid, and we've got these first three columns are all linked to other tables, and what we've got is a drop down in each of these columns that links to these other tables. If you look at the code for the users form, you'll see how I've done those drop downs. They also make use of the same classes that I've done before, and that same procedure that retrieves everything in a table is being used to populate these drop downs as well. So take a look at users and see how I've done that. And see here we've got the roles grid needs filling out. So what I'll be doing over the course of the project is asking you to complete more of these tables following the similar design patterns that I've set out here. And the advantage of working to this pattern is we'll each understand each other's code that much more quickly. So any questions on this, obviously talk among yourselves and come back to me.